Today is Wendy Kammer-Strode. She's focusing on unusual materials, and she'll be discussing some works that are on view at the museum right now and others that have been on view in the recent past. She's one of our dedicated docents, and Parrish docents are a group of talented volunteers who lead tours in the museum, and most have been with the program since 2012. Wendy has. She's been a docent for 8 years, and she's very active in the program, especially in our monthly presentations that we do in partnership with the Alzheimer's Disease Resource Center, where she creates tailored tours for people with Alzheimer's and dementia. So I'm going to turn it over to Wendy and get things started. Go ahead, Wendy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kara. Can you hear me okay? Kara, can you hear me? I hope. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Thanks to all my fellow docents this morning. Thank you to the staff of the Parrish. Okay, good. Thanks to the staff of the Parrish and to all our visitors today. I miss you all, and I'm very grateful to be able to spend this time with you. So let's get started. Today, we're talking about materials and methods. And while all art is made out of some kind of material, prior to modernism, much of art did not place emphasis on the materials themselves, but rather the image which they made up. And by the way, modernism is in the fine arts was characterized by a break with the past and a search for new forms of expression, which fostered a period of experimentation from the late 19th century to the mid-20th century, particularly in the years following World War I. This led to the use of techniques that drew attention to the formation, the process, and the materials used in creating works of art. So to speak of materiality in contemporary art is to emphasize the mediums, those art materials employed by the artist, and the physical process of making art. Our first slide is Devil, Devil Love from 1970 by Alan Shields. It's composed of cotton belting, acrylic threads, beads, and wood. It's 8 feet high by almost 16 feet long. Alan Shields was born on his family's farm in Kansas, learning to sew and quilt from his mother and 2 sisters, and where farm life depended on recycling and frugality, which would later inform his work as an artist. He attended Kansas State University, first studying engineering, then theater, then art, and then ultimately leaving without a degree, but having already made 3D paintings with a sewing machine despite having seen little contemporary art firsthand. By the early 70s, Shields was immersed in the freedom and energy of the New York countercultural art scene in Soho, where his interest in process art led him to reject traditional painting, take it off the wall, and even the canvas off the stretcher. In Devil, Devil Love, Shields deconstructed the material, sewing it into a lattice of color while mingling elements from more traditional crafts like beading with those of so-called fine art, all in the name of what he called losing the ground and thereby changing the format of the medium. Alan Shields was an unforgettable towering figure, a gentle giant with a shaved head and a full beard, resembling a harpooner out of Melville. He adorned himself with his handmade wooden beaded body art, and he worked as an artist and a ferry boat captain on Shelter Island, where he lived from 1972 to 2005. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we have Untitled, circa late 1970s by Louise Nevelson. It is painted wood. It's larger than 8 feet high by 6 feet wide by 15 inches deep. Louise Nevelson's compositions of found wooden material, stacked and painted, transformed everyday materials into objects of beauty and some of the most defining sculptures of the 20th century. Escaping Tsarist persecution, 5-year-old Nevelson and her family came to the US in 1905, settling in Rockland, Maine. Her father became a carpenter and then a lumber merchant, predicting his daughter's favored future material. And after seeing a plaster cast of a statue of Joan of Arc at the Rockland Public Library when she was 9 years old, Nevelson decided to be an artist. At age 20, she went to New York, attending the Art Students League, then escaping an early marriage, traveled to Munich to study with abstract expressionist painter Hans Hofmann. Back in New York 2 years later, she assisted Diego Rivera with his WPA murals and was introduced by him to pre-Columbian art. Her first solo show in 1941 featured terracotta and wood sculptures based on Mayan and other primitive imagery. Nevelson said that when she first began making her dramatically conceived wall pieces in the mid-50s, she couldn't afford traditional art materials. Instead, foraging in her Manhattan neighborhood, searching with her young son for firewood to heat her home and for cast-off wooden objects, which she was to turn into her enormous assemblages. She referred to herself as the original recycler, and with her use of found materials that she painted a monochromatic, often velvet-like flat black. She said, you take any material and when you convert it to black, it's so distinguished. The use of light and shadow as elements of her sculpture, whether present in a large carrying assemblage or a single painted wooden spool, brought forth a richness of presence in any given space, which was frequently outdoors. Always fascinated with the living quality of wood, by the 1960s, she added plastics and formica, and in the 70s began to create monumentally scaled pieces in aluminum and steel. When you put things together, she said, things that other people have thrown out, you're really bringing them to life, a spiritual life that surpasses the life for which they were originally created. Next slide, please. Here we see Egyptian painting Sahara from 1980 by Dorothea Rockburn. It's composed of Conti crayon, pencil, oil, and gesso on folded linen with wall drawing. It's a little less than 8 feet high by a little less than 5 feet wide. A painter, draftswoman, choreographer, mixed media, and installation artist, Dorothea Rockburn came to prominence in the late 1960s with a minimalist influence work pitched somewhere between painting and sculpture, often employing unusual materials. Trained at Montreal's École des Beaux-Arts, followed by 4 years at the legendary Black Mountain College in Asheville, North Carolina, she studied with painters Franz Klein and Esteban Vicente, composer Merce Cunningham, choreographer John Cage, and mathematician Max Dent, resulting in Rockburn's lifelong commitment to exploration and innovative crisscrossing nature, mathematics, astronomy, archaeology, and art. Inspired by her time there, Egyptian painting Sahara, 1980, Rockburn interpreted the evocative light and shadows with a subtle relief of geometric shapes using folded gesso linen, intersected by the blue, black, and red wall lines, becoming the first artist to use the wall to embellish the nature of the art. Lives in East Hampton since 1980. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here we see Lemon, November 28th, 1983, by Donald Sultan. Oil and plaster, latex paint, and tar on vinyl tile mounted on 4 masonite panels. Larger than 8 foot wide and 8 foot across and high. Donald Sultan is best known for his large-scale compositions set against tar black backgrounds, fitting the criteria of still life, although Sultan has described his work as first and foremost abstract. He received his BFA in 1983 from the University of North Carolina and his MFA in 1975 from the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. Instead of canvas, Sultan's works on masonite covered with 12-inch linoleum tiles, the sort used for flooring, with the tiles dictating the format, 1 foot, 4 foot, or 8 foot squares, creating subtle grids. The vinyl's cut into the shapes he desires, then filled in with plaster or tar, which is painted over, all creating layers of texture and depth and contributing to the intention and actual doing associated with process art. Sultan lives in New York and Sag Harbor. Next slide, please. This is Voyage, 1999, from the American sculptor and painter Stephen Antonakos. Stephen Antonakos was a Greek-born American. His installations illuminated indoor and outdoor public spaces and museums around the world. His family immigrated to the US from a small Greek village in 1930 when he was 4 years old, settling in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. He graduated from Fort Hamilton High School, serving in the U.S. Army in the Philippines. In the late 1940s, he studied at the New York State Institute of Applied Arts and Sciences. As one of the first artists to experiment with neon in the realm of fine art, he utilized the vibrant transitory light as a painter uses paint, juxtaposed with solid geometric forms, linking his work with minimalism. Later, his backlit panels framing each piece in a glowing halo recalled the Byzantine paintings, which always fascinated him, and his memories of stained glass windows in Greek Orthodox churches. Next slide, please. And there's an example of a beautiful stained glass window with the illumination from behind. Next slide, please. Here we see Aquarium by the American artist Joe Zucker. Over the past 5 decades, Joe Zucker's work has often related to process and innovative use of materials. Zucker was born in Chicago and received both his BA and MFA from the Art Institute of Chicago. He came to New York in 1968 when he was 27 years old, at a time when the interest in process art was of importance to many younger artists. In the 70s, he experimented with gluing cotton balls to the canvas in a gridded arrangement, then painting over them. The result transformed the flat surface of the canvas to a highly textured surface reminiscent of mosaic. Joe Zucker lives in East Hampton. Next slide, please. Now we see Stephen and William Ladd in front of 1960s TV dinner from 2015, composed of archival board, fiber, metal, and beads. As brothers and artistic collaborators, Stephen and William Ladd worked together in their Williamsburg, Brooklyn studio, inspired by their close family bond and early childhood memories of growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, as they explored design, fashion, fine art, and crafts with a concentrated fascination for materials and process. Stephen began cutting and sewing his own clothes while at school in Kansas City and fell in love with hand-sewn couture clothing, while William became focused on beading and macrame as a teenager, followed by a modeling career which took him around the world. Their signature works include abstracted landscapes based on shared memories, people, and experiences. Displayed in grids on the wall or in stacked boxes, the handmade assemblages consist of as-found colored leftover trimmings, cotton webbing, and trinkets. All is put together without glue, only using pins. In the fall 2014 exhibition, Mary, Queen of the Universe, named after their elementary school, the Ladd brothers worked with 1,100 children and adults from 16 schools and community organizations participating in the Parrish Scroll-a-thon, where they learned how the artists made and used their scrolls and collaborated on the group piece seen here. Also creating individual scrolls to keep for themselves, as well as being photographed for a portrait mural. The Ladd brothers' guiding principles inform everything they do. Spend your life doing what you love, be focused and disciplined, and collaborate. Next slide, please. And there we see a close-up of 1960s TV dinner. We're on to PM's Mum from 1985 by the American artist John Toreano. This is painted and incised plywood with plastic. It's about 8 feet square. John Toreano has worked in a variety of mediums and methods, including paint, sculpture, relief, furniture, and hand-blown glass. Growing up in Flint, Michigan in a large Catholic family, with much of his youth as an altar boy, and the environment of the church influencing his art and its use of jewels serving as a metaphor for vigil lights. He earned his BFA in 1964 from the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Michigan, followed by Ohio State University. Throughout his career, he has investigated the properties of faceted gems in a variety of mediums and methods in the context of lighting, placement, and materials. In the gem-studded gestural plywood painting, PM's Mum, he pays homage to the underlying structure of PIAT Mondrian's early drawings, Maybe we could see that slide, Kara. Thank you. So this is an example of PIAT Montagne's early drawings of chrysanthemums, and by creating depth and sharp painterly strokes on incised plywood, which he inlaid with faceted gems, he created what has been described as paintings that stand still and make you move. Toreano is a clinical professor of studio art at NYU. Okay, and on to our last. Thank you. Here we have the nominal 3 to William of Ockham from 1963 by the American sculptor Dan Flavin. These are cool white fluorescent lights, approximately 6 feet high, with a variable dimension depending on the environment they are installed in. Born in Jamaica, New York, Dan Flavin studied for the priesthood before enlisting in the U.S. Air Force. To join his twin brother David, he trained as an air weather technician while studying art through the Adult Extension Program of the University of Maryland in Korea. Returning to New York in 1956, Flavin briefly attended the Hans Hofmann School of Fine Arts and later studied art history at the New School and painting and drawing at Columbia University. He worked as a mailroom clerk at the Guggenheim, a guard and elevator operator at the MoMA, and a guard at the Museum of Natural History as well. 1963 marked the beginning of Flavin's exclusive use of commercially available fluorescent light as medium, dropping everything except light, color, and space, and sculpting the light in site-specific situations or proposals, as he preferred to classify his work. His use of the unadorned fluorescent fixture as an aesthetic object placed him at the forefront of a generation of artists whose emphasis on industrial materials and elementary forms became some of the basic elements of minimalism. The nominal 3 to William of Ockham from 1963 consists of 6 6-foot-tall vertical fluorescent tubes on a wall, all emitting white light in an order of 1, 2, and then 3 tubes, each grouped together with the space separating them site-specific. Dedicated to the 14th century English philosopher known for the disproven theory of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one and is reached by shaving away unnecessary information. But also a tribute to Occam is this idea: it is a sin to do with more than what can be done with less. In the decades that followed, Dan Flavin continued to explore fluorescent structures with color, light, and sculptural space, confining himself to a limited palette of red, blue, green, pink, yellow, ultraviolet, and 4 different whites, using only straight 2, 4, 6, and 8-foot tubes, and beginning in 1972, he introduced circles. In 1983, the Dia Center for the Arts opened the Dan Flavin Art Institute in Bridgehampton, New York. Conceived under the direction of the artist, it's established a permanent unified installation of 9 works in fluorescent light and a gallery for changing exhibition, all housed in a historic building, once a firehouse, later a Baptist church. In 1972, Flavin started summering in Bridgehampton, and in 1980, bought the 18th century salt box house in Wainscott, where he lived until his death in 1996. Back to you, Kara.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Kara.
So we have a couple comments and one question for you.
Sure.
A few docents, a few of your fellow docents have joined us for the talk, and one made note of the fact that several of the artists studied with abstract painter Hans Hofmann, and then went on to leave painting and explore new materials, which is very interesting. And we know Hans Hofmann was an influential teacher of many artists. And then we have one question asking if you could explain a little bit more about process art, which I think is I think you referred to.
Sure.
With Alan Shields.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, several of the artists. Process art is an artistic movement as well as a creative sentiment where the end product of art and craft is not the principal focus. Process art is concerned with the actual doing and often entails an inherent motivation, rationale, and real intentionality. Therefore, art is viewed as a creative journey or process rather than as a deliverable or end product.
Thank you.